All right. We are live, Blakey.
All right, the the casting of the first pod has begun. I'm going to go with that because it is in fact a podcast. It's called the Old Gold Soccer Podcast, and you've roped me in, and you've given me this title, but I've got no idea what we're doing. I'm Greg Blake, by the way, or what's left of me, and I'm with Kyle Patterson. We haven't worked together since mid-90s, mid-1990s, I would have thought.
Was it 1890s or 1990s? Anyway, it feels like 1890s.
How are you, brother?
I'm good. Now, to explain it, the Old Gold Soccer Podcast with the emphasis on gold. But like you remember in 2004, another marketing guy in the New Football Federation Australia famously said, it's all about old soccer and new football, which was that old soccer was inferior, new football was superior. And where were you sitting on that great divide?
Has anybody worked out it's exactly the same thing, just a different title? It's the same thing. I don't know why there was ever that divide. It's crazy. I have been thinking about this a lot, and I want to chat, and we'll do it a bit later on in the series, hopefully, but the 4 greatest lies that people in this game have ever been told, and they repeated lies, and they continue to perpetuate themselves. It's craziness. We're the same game as we always were. We just keep fiddling with it, you know. Do you know what I mean, Kyle? You don't want to be fiddling with it.
But having said that, the old soccer, new football divide has left a lot of people feeling they've been disenfranchised.
Oh, absolutely.
They have been marginalised. They've been told that whatever you did in the old soccer era, which is only about 120 years, by the way, was worth nothing. Now, that does rankle with me because, like you, Blakey, I am quite a bit of old soccer in me, in my bones.
I don't know if you've noticed, but I've got this magnificent heritage Heidelberg United Alexander top. This is the original top, or a replica of the original top they wore in their very first competitive game back in 1958. That was the year I was born, Kyle. Look, you're right. We ostracised, and we ostracised the wrong people. That's the problem. We never rid the game of the ne'er-do-wells, the Johnny-come-latelys, the spin artists. And all the people that actually had the grounding in the game, we knocked them off. Well, 3 or 4 times we had a crack at knocking them off. Get rid of the ethnic element for a start. They only built the game in this country, and now all of a sudden we've got, what is it? Inclusion and acceptance officers. What are they called?
Diversity officers.
Diversity officers. We'll try to lure people to the game under the basis of diversity when, in fact,
we invented diversity in sport.
Yes, we did.
Yes.
Nothing included the communities, particularly after the influx of, the immigration influx after the Second World War. Nothing was more inclusive than this particular game that we follow, old soccer, so you can all get stuffed.
Yeah, so basically, Blakey, the whole premise of this podcast series, Old Gold Soccer, is to say, let's turn it on its head. Old soccer is a very disparaging term used to sort of blacken the great work of a lot of people, a lot of generations.
Yeah, it really is.
I reckon there's more gold in old soccer than there is sometimes in the new football. So we want to come back and say to all the people out there, if you're listening, we're going to try and celebrate all the great things that were part of old soccer. And we're going to try and show you the lessons that can still be applied today to new football. Because as you made the point, Blakey, there's nothing new under the sun, and we keep going through the same circles of hell. The same circles of hell in this game.
Because the issue is we continue to allow, and look, I don't want to be disparaging about everybody, but I will anyway. We continue to allow this sort of revolving door policy where people come in for 5 minutes and go out for 5 minutes. And I'm not talking about a club level. I'm talking administration level. So nobody really knows. I'll give you a great example of what I'm talking about. And this isn't about administration as much, but let me just ask you, if something occurred in the game, okay, once in your lifetime, twice in my lifetime, it's fairly historic, yeah?
Yes.
It is. Okay, so in 2023, in the Victorian Premier League, Avondale, in the Doherty Cup, I didn't get to the Australia Cup, but in the Doherty Cup, in the finals and in the home and away season, in 31 games, they scored 101 goals. Okay, Now that was the first time since, and I'll just go through it quickly, since 1983. So that's 40 years ago. The last team to score 100 goals in all their games in a season was Melbourne, Croatia. They didn't win the league though. The previous team to win the league here in Victoria, to score over 100 goals, was in fact Wilhelmina in 1958.
Okay.
So
what a famous year.
yeah, famous year. But and in terms of your life reference, it's happened once in your lifetime.
Yeah.
That's fairly significant. 31 games, 101 goals. They were magnificent, Avondale, the Avengers, under Zoran Markovsky, a great bloke, great coach. But when I looked about the media and everything else, not a word about it. Not a single word. I got in touch with Football Victoria and I said, do you realise this is... Not a word. They're not interested because...
There's no corporate memory
There's
sometimes.
Who's Wilhelmina?
Yeah.
You know, who's well, we know who Melbourne Croatia is, but it's just... it astounds me that there's no... Look, I'm a bit dishevelled and I'm very old, but it just astounds me that we don't realise that the thread that runs through the whole thing is exactly... It's the same thread.
Yeah.
It always has been. We're not two different competitions.
So my contention is, and we might be on different sides of the fence here, okay? We were soccer, and again, it's not an American word. I get cranky about that. Soccer is not a word invented by Americans.
It's not.
It's a historic word because it used to be called association football, and there was rugby football, and so it was shortened to a sock, and then it became soccer to differentiate from the rugger buggers. Very simple. When the colonies started taking the game up in the US, New Zealand, Australia, etc., they didn't want to be associated with rugger buggers or other types of football that were invented, like our so-called indigenous code of AFL. So I'm a big believer we should have stuck with soccer. It differentiated us, it had history, and it means that when I come to Melbourne or I go to an AFL state, I don't see the word football having been part of a grand theft by the AFL to appropriate it for their use, okay? We should have stayed soccer. What's your view?
Look, I'm ambivalent. I really don't mind either way because, again, it's semantics and it doesn't change the course of the game. It doesn't. The only people that were excited about the change to football were people that they virtue signal things, and it doesn't mean a thing. And I'll give you another great case in point. I like doing this. I'm smarter than I appear at the moment, Kyle. But is in the United States. Okay, you've got NHL, right? That's hockey. You've got the Major League Baseball, MLB. You've got NFL football. You've got NBL basketball. And standing now proudly alongside those four huge competitions in a market that's very similar to Australia.
Correct, yep.
Is what? What's the competition?
Major League
Soccer. It's nothing to do with the name. Stop being pricks and thinking that you're changing the world by changing the name and it's new football. It's not. You've diluted the game in this country rather than, you haven't enhanced it because there's no point of difference. And people outside of soccer, football, couldn't give a stuff what we call ourselves.
Correct, yeah. Except, I'll say this, the greatest brand name we've ever had, and it continues to this day, is the Socceroos.
Yep.
Did the people who decided to jump on the football naming bandwagon say, oh, what are we going to do about this this little national team? The only team that's been continually the number one brand, although the Matildas now, fair enough, are taking a big slice of that market. How do we reconcile having Socceroos as part of what is now called Football Australia?
That's just change for change's sake, mate. That's what I'm tired of. Change for sake. I've done a whole. You and I spoke. We're like, you and I, right? When I look at you, I just feel. I feel
nauseous.
No, nostalgic, beautifully nostalgic. But we haven't been in contact. And we're not allowed to date don't forget, we're watching the Old Gold Soccer podcast, by the way. If you don't understand the relevance, you have to go back to the start and listen to it again. I don't even know what a podcast actually is. Where does it go? I kept thinking it sounds like something from the Salem witch trials. You will be podcast until you admit you're a witch.
Well, I'll explain at the end where people can find our podcast,
okay,
which is on
beautiful.
places like Spotify and Google Play. Anywhere there is good podcasts sold. Even maybe the canteen at Olympic Village, they might sell our podcast.
I don't even have a mobile phone, so I don't know what you're talking about. But what was I on about? I
want to go back to the theme of the podcast, which is
the
old gold soccer, because I do feel for all the players, coaches, officials, fans, anyone involved in that era,
Yeah.
which was magnificent.
Yes.
There's lots of gold there. Now, we're biased because we were part of it. However, I think the old soccer, new football divide has made it really hard for people to be proud of their heritage. And the one thing our game has got is a lot of history. We don't
Absolutely.
celebrate it well. We're going to try and do a bit of that celebration here on this podcast.
Yeah, no. And look, we should. You make a great point, Kyle, and we've got a whole lot of
KP to you, Blakey.
KP. I do apologise. Just as a bit of background, you recruited me to SBS in 1987. I recall that, which was lovely. And I found on the internet, or rather, my daughter found on the internet, a clip of a promotion that you did when we got soccer on radio here in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And you interviewed me out at Preston's ground at Connor Reserve. Which
I
was-
recall that vaguely.
It was lovely. I'm getting a flood of memories back. What you're going to have to keep me on point because I am old. and I
Soccer
forget.
v football.
Oh,
So
that's
what I'm
right.
saying to you, my contention is
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
My contention is this. It's been an indulgence, a folly, and a great waste of rebranding to call our game football when, in fact, we have, in New South Wales, if you say footy to somebody, they think rugby league.
Yep.
Or if you say football, they think it's rugby union. In Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, if you say football, they think of the oval game. When you say soccer, people know exactly what you're talking about.
Yep.
Unless you want to get conceited and say, and no deference to people no longer with us, this whole conceit about, it's the world game. As if Australians care what the other billion people on the planet are doing.
Listen, I'll tell you, you and I have developed some very common themes because it's exactly the same as what I was trying to get at before. Thinking that you've achieved something by rebranding, it's Soccer Australia now, whatever it is, in football.
No, it's
sorry,
called Football
Victoria,
Australia.
Australian Football Victoria.
See, it's confusing you even.
Yeah, but you haven't achieved anything. It makes no difference. That nobody cares.
Yeah.
And that's the point. You haven't achieved a thing look, just recently I got some intel from Football Victoria where they're interviewing people for them. I think I'm allowed to say this, for their media department. And one or two of the people that were interviewed, I know them, and they were told, don't worry about the men's competition, worry about the community football and the women's football. We've just taken our focus off the core product.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what you brand the product, and because it's a great game. Good Lord, it's a great game. And the last 10 years when I've been covering the Premier League for Heidelberg, even that, what I love? I'll tell you what I love, Kyle, is journeying to far-flung places and seeing different grounds around Melbourne. There's a beauty to it. The way the game's presented now, even with the A-League, the sort of art of there's such an egalitarian kind of feeling when you go to a place like Dandenong City, for example. Look, you have to drive through Sherwood, Forest Cove and thing to get to Dandenong City, but you get there and it's got a it's the only ground I've ever seen where they've got a grandstand at one end, but it's beautiful.
Are they getting around to the rest, or that's it? They're done.
But it's lovely and it's an adventure, and it's part of it's almost something that people miss now. And I remember we spoke about this on the phone. Is that if you follow the A-League, for example, there's no adventure in going to watch a game anymore. You have to make sure you've got your tickets booked in the right place. If you want to sit with your mates, you all have to book in. And if you move, excuse me, sir, don't believe that's your seat. You've got to go, but they're empty. No, I'm sorry, sir, that's your allocated seat. You can't pay cash anywhere. You can't get drunk and have a good time. And I'm not even. Look, rite of passage for me was when I was a kid, was going to Olympic Park with a couple of VB long necks. And
VB long necks.
yeah, you could just walk
Good
into
luck.
the
That
ground.
must have been a long time
It
ago.
was a long time ago.
Were they smuggled in, or did you just walk them in?
Well, you just walk them in.
You walk
Yeah.
in the VB long necks. Wow.
Absolutely. It was a different time, You could have a smart... And the other thing was, though, you didn't have... it wasn't gentrified, and it wasn't... But it had nothing else. But, nowadays, if you're well-moneyed, you're up in a VIP box, you're sitting around, getting... silver service and all this. And it's just it lacks any kind of joie de vivre.
But that's the thing then. Old soccer has been used again as a terminology to try and point to that so-called grungy era. I'll call it grungy because the grounds weren't first class. They were grungy.
But that was the fun of it.
Where the players weren't media managed to within an inch of being blancmange. They actually had opinions and they spoke them because they weren't full-time. Some of them were plumbers, car mechanics, whatever, Monday to Friday. They were footballers on the weekend. And so, but again, I don't think it's a virtue to say new football is played in these sanitised major stadia, as you point out, to sometimes fickle audiences, not full. So again, paying homage to all the great grounds that we've lost, which were condemned. Oh no, that's an old soccer venue. Crazy.
It is really crazy. And look, I can see the virtue, in some respects, of what they've endeavoured to do with the game, but it misses so much. It lacks so much texture and joy. And look, I'm a skip. You know, I don't have any ethnic ties whatsoever. I'll tell you the reason I supported Heidelberg, and this is the truth, right? Jimmy Mangopoulos, who was the president of Heidelberg, he's also a legal eagle, right? And this is not a joke. This is seriously. Because I used to just go. No, I had no friends. I still don't now. I don't care. But I used to go and journey to the Schindler Reserve and Middle Park. You go past me. I used to go down to St Kilda, down to the junction there on a Sunday to have a bit of fun, just like around. And then all of a sudden I started realising you'd drive past, you'd be on the train, I should say, going past Middle Park, and you could hear all this noise, this cacophony of noise under the wrought iron roof there. I thought I have to have a look. So I started going to the different grounds, and that's what I mean. It was an adventure, Kyle. You met new people. The reason I understand, I'm multicultural, which I don't like the use of the word, but because I met all these wonderful people.
Yeah.
But Jimmy Mangopoulos at Heidelberg, okay? So one of us, but you and I, one of us was at Olympic Park on the VB Longnecks, probably a little bit, and I got arrested, and I was in the back of a divvy van.
What, not just for drinking VB Longnecks?
No.
What else happened?
It's just misbehaving, bit of a loudmouth teenager. And Jim Mangopoulos, who didn't know me, he just knew my face because I was at all the Heidelberg games at Olympic Park. He convinced the coppers to let me go, and I thought, this is my club. How can I go wrong?
Oh, what a gentleman.
No.
What a gentleman and what a hero.
He was a beauty. So I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, life was an adventure, and honestly, we've become such a nanny state. We've become a nanny nation, and I think people miss a lot just simply by not being able to have the adventures that you once had.
Yep.
That's
So we're going to just wrap up this first episode. I'm going to put you on the spot, Blakey, because if I was emperor for a day, somewhat akin, had the powers that Frank Lowy once had, to basically, which were great powers used very judiciously, I think, but we'll get to that in a later episode. If I could, I would go back and undo it all. I'd go back to calling it Soccer Australia. I'd call them the Socceroos. I'd call it the Victorian Soccer State League or the New South Wales Soccer State League. I'd go back to it because, you know what? I'm done with trying to convince people that you don't need to sanitise the game to have a thriving competition. And you know what? You're going to have people, not just the fans who, when we were watching NSL, were with us because they're all old like us. I'm talking about their kids. Suddenly this game would have an exotic, vibrant feel to it. It wouldn't be too sanitised, this new football A-League era, which I've been part of. I worked in it, but I've got to say it's missing. It might be sausage, but I don't know where the sizzle got to.
I will say, as I've said many, many times, many people, water finds its own level, and we continue to try and contrive to make this bigger than perhaps it's ready to be. Let the game be, and I've got to go. I've done a list of all the changes that we've instituted over the years. It's bizarre. We just we never get to a point where we go, all right, this is good. Let's go with this and see where we can take it. No, we have to do something more spectacular. As I said, the four greatest lies that have been told over the years. Perhaps we'll lead the next episode with those lies. We won't dwell on it, but I'll tell you what they are,
and we'll talk about that.
Have a talk. We've got so much to talk about. I've got to see you once. How many? When are we doing this? Once a week?
Look, we're in cyberspace now, Blake. It's not like when you're on the number 42 bus to the Olympic Village and you have to get off at the stop. We're just going to appear in people's phones, on their podcast. That's the beauty of this era. We are true dinosaurs, Blakey. But I will guide you through.
Are we?
We are dinosaurs. We are dinosaurs. we are dinosaurs.
I got no idea.
This was the first episode of the Old Gold Soccer Podcast. I'm KP. He's Blakey. We're going to do a series of these things, and like I say, you can find us anywhere there's good podcasts, on Spotify, on Google Play, anywhere. Catch us on TikTok.
Can you see it? Can you get a copy of the newsagents?
No, not the news. The printing press is dead, Blakey. Find us on TikTok. Find us on Instagram. Send us a note if you want. On behalf of me, KP, it's been great to kick off this series. Blakey, wrap it up for us.
Oh, look, the first pod has been cast officially on the Old Gold Soccer Podcast. Kyle, it's lovely to see your smiling face. It's your eyes that light you up. It's always your eyes. I'll always see you as being 27, not 503 or whatever you are. Okay. Catch you later.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening to the first ever Old Gold Soccer Podcast.